Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll go ahead and get started here. If people are joining in, come on in. There's room for everybody, obviously. Good morning. Thank you so much for making time to attend the second in our series of Friday Faith Conversations. I know for many of you who are parish leaders and in ministry, it's a busy time with next week being Holy Week. So thank you again for carving out a little bit of time this morning to hear from Denise and all she has to offer. I will introduce Denise in a second, but first I want to go ahead and acknowledge our partners in this webinar series of Friday Faith Conversations. My name is Heidi Bussey, and I'm the editorial manager at 23rd Publications here at Bayard Publishing. And we have been offering this series of conversations for the past several months in partnership with University of Dayton and the Institute for Pastoral Initiatives. So thanks so much to them for sort of co-sponsoring these webinars with us. I also want to do some logistics here and just let you know that Denise welcomes questions, but you're all muted. And so if you have a question while Denise is presenting, please feel free to just write it in the chat down there at the bottom. If you click on, if you're not familiar with Zoom, you just go to the bottom of your screen there and the little chat function will come up and you can just write a question there. I will try to manage those and monitor those throughout Denise's presentation, and we'll try to save some time at the end where I'll ask Denise your questions. We'll get to as many as possible if you have questions or you want to hear more about something. And then finally, before I introduce Denise, of course, I have to acknowledge her marvelous book that she has written with us at 23rd Publications, A Parish Guide to Integrated Faith Formation. I have it here. I read it. I love it. It is some of what you'll hear this morning, of course, is contained in this book, but is so much more than what we're hearing this morning. So highly recommend A Parish Guide to Integrated Faith Formation for every parish leader, for you to talk about with your teams if you don't own a copy yet. And we will talk more about that at the end of the webinar. So I had to do a little commercial here. Okay, so let me go ahead and introduce Denise Utter, who is, if you don't know Denise, she is a brilliant writer and speaker and teacher and catechetical leader. And she's one of those rare souls who understands both the theory, right, and the teachings, but also the practice and the nitty-gritty of what it's like to be in parish ministry and parish life and work with families today. So Denise, you can introduce yourself even more than that, but I'm just so grateful you have made time to be with us this morning. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Denise.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you for those kind words. It's always like turn red when somebody says something so nice. I so appreciate your time, your words, and all of you that are here. I'm excited about this. I think we have such an important time right now to connect home church and parish, that domestic church and the parish. So this is a theme, a topic near and dear to my heart for about 20 years now. So nurturing a faithful future, equipping parents for faith formation. This is all about strengthening that relationship. So as Heidi said, I am a coach, speaker, trainer, writer. This is the book that I've written on this topic, kind of coming out of the pandemic, the lessons we learned, some strategies, some models, but also I was in making that paradigm shift to a family-centered faith formation approach in a parish for a dozen years or more. And so I include some of the big mistakes we made at the beginning. So I call them some of the guiding essentials, and that's there. I have a website, familieslivingfaith.com. It is live, but there'll be a big launch come June 1st. You can find my email there as well, but it's here because if you have any questions, I am always speaking with parish leaders, resourcing them. There's a Calendly link there. So if you want to spend just a quick free 15 minutes talking about what to do next after hearing some of these ideas, please feel free to contact me at any time. Like I said, this is a passion of mine. We're going to kind of hit just 4 quick topics today. I can speak on this all day for a couple days, et cetera. But today in this time, we're going to talk about real briefly, kind of reality versus vision. What's the faith practice and faith formation today? And then parents matter most. This is research we've been hearing since the early 2000s with Christian Smith, but many more since then. How can we encourage, equip, empower parents to be the spiritual leaders of their household? And then two things that have the greatest impact on that faith transmission, that if we could really equip parents in this area, will make the biggest difference: God talk, or faith conversations, and faith practices. And then what's working in parishes today? What are some of the strategies, the models that you can use to equip parents to build that relationship between parish and church? And again, I know that's not to say many of you are already doing this, if not most of you. Maybe you're not having an entirely family-centered approach, but I know you're doing things to reach out to parents. So I don't by any means say that none of this is happening in your community. It's happening in almost every community that I work with. It looks different everywhere. And I think that's that unique time that we have. People have been experimenting and trying things during COVID. That kind of accelerated the pace of that disaffiliation, of that disengagement. So we have a really important time and unique time to be making that connection. So as I said, the research tells us again and again, parents matter most. You can read any of Christian Smith's work, Justin Barkus that's worked with him, Melinda Lundquist Denton, lots of research telling us parents matter most. And then we have Bob McCarty telling us in Going, Going, Gone that many people have left. They're walking with their feet, and he kind of breaks it up into a few different reasons. And then even some of our Protestant friends really talking about people finding faith, God, community elsewhere. So what do we do when we've given our lives to this mission, to this ministry? The disaffiliation in the US, these are just numbers, of course, but they tell a story. The percentage of adults who have disaffiliated from religion, who say that they are no religion, and this will include atheists, agnostics, deconstructionists, reconstructionists, those adults, only 3% would have identified that way in 1970. And it took another 37 years for that to get up to 12%. So a 9% increase. But then in the next only 12 years, we see it double to 24%. And in the last two, another 6%. We can't keep doing what we're doing today. So a pre-pandemic, post-pandemic look, and it doesn't look extremely significant, but when you're talking 24 people, 26% of people regularly attended Mass and only 24% now, we see that effect. And when you look at the number of people who never attend religious services, 25% going up to 33%, we really need to make that kind of bend in the trajectory soon. Kind of connected to that, parents great, and I'll tell you why it's connected in a minute, but parents' greatest concern for their children in 2023 is mental health. You look at 40% are very concerned, 36% somewhat concerned. That means 76% of parents are somewhat or very concerned about their children struggling with anxiety or depression. And we know that many parents are struggling with this today after the polarization in our world, after the isolation from the pandemic, just because they're worrying about their children in the midst of this. But we have hope. Remember, despite how we may feel at times, we have a God who never will leave us or forsake us. Instead, he will strengthen and help us. Studies show that religion and spirituality improve mental health. And I don't say this to diminish anybody that's struggling with mental health, but we know that people, when they are seeking and finding meaning and purpose, when they feel peace, when there's a sense of hope, it changes everything. So if we can connect with parents, that can make all the difference. When we looked at that kind of graph a moment ago, and there's that little sliver that people that did not respond, that almost 1%. If we looked at the time that we have in most of our faith formation programs, about 30 hours of faith formation per year, we have 3 1,000, so less than that one little sliver, 3 1,000s influence over the time of a child's year. When we partner with parents, that goes up exponentially. We can then influence their time in those faith practices and faith conversations from morning till night, just by equipping parents, just by empowering and encouraging them to have those faith conversations, to have those faith practices, and affirming them in what they're already doing. So many of them don't connect some of the things they do with their children, that they do in their lives, with faith, but we can help kind of make that bridge. So we've said these two things matter most. And even our directory for catechesis tells us that the family is a proclamation of faith, that it is the natural place, that it happens in simple and spontaneous ways, that it is in the daily, organic, ongoing kind of interactions instead of our systemic, kind of systematic, intentional practices within a classroom. Not to say that the teaching we're doing doesn't matter, but that unless it's accompanied with that daily interaction, it will not have the impact that we want it to. So if you just look at the regular interactions of families, from the things that they already do of sacrificing for one another, forgiving one another, healing one another, loving one another, praying for each other, all of those things are regular and almost daily in families. And if we can give parents the language to have around some of the things they're already doing, if we can affirm them in that, we can accompany them to a greater relationship, a stronger relationship to the church, and help them have that faith transmission to the children so that there is hope, there is peace, there is that sense of purpose in their life. We learned a lot of lessons during the pandemic, and I go through many of those in the book. But today I just really wanted to focus on a few, that leaders took some time to experiment during COVID. They took some time to go, okay, I can't be with the families that I want to. I can't be with the children. We can't have them in a classroom. What can we do? And so leaders offered families opportunities to learn in new and exciting ways. Sometimes it was on Zoom, sometimes in Google Classrooms. There were many curriculums that offered ideas of sending video back, reflections back. So we got to have some families really sharing some of the conversations and practices they were having at home. And I think that empowered parents during that time. Now, it was a difficult time for parents. I think right now it's probably harder than it's ever been to be a parent, also to be a child. But some of what we heard was very encouraging, was very hopeful. And I think if we give families more that opportunity to share their experience, to share their stories, to learn how to tell their stories, we make them evangelizers in the community. So helping them find ways to do that. And there was a lot of that happened. Images, having families share the images of things they created, of video responses to questions, sharing those on social media and on the website and in the bulletin, and all kinds of ways to connect the community that might be somewhat marginally connected outside of those storytelling opportunities. Video reflections, showing us kind of what they think. So there were so many opportunities where we got feedback from families. Through that lessons, we got to discover a lot of what was working in parishes. And I've talked to parishes around the country to see kind of where they're at, what's working, what's not working, where they're struggling. And here are some things that really have stood out during this time. We have in-person parent gatherings, kind of going from that large group, small group, large group again. There are a lot of people that have gone back to in-person gatherings, classes, small groups, etc. But they've done it in a way now that they knew they needed to continue to include parents. They were including them while we were on Zoom. So now they've started gathering. We'll talk about the many different ways to do that, though. It doesn't have to be in every month. It can be if it's based on the curriculum of the students. But it could also be thematic. It could be based on the seasons of the year. We'll go through some of those. So there's the in-person parent gatherings. There's also the online parent gatherings, and that can be without children or gathering families together online. A hybrid approach, using a little bit of both. And we'll kind of share some experiences from different parishes and some values that we've come to learn from that. And then parent or family-led formation plans. I saw a lot of parishes doing this during COVID, and some of that has continued. And I think that can be a great experience because you're giving ownership to the families. And anytime somebody has ownership over choices, their schedule, et cetera, you're going to see greater participation. And then finally, integrated faith formation, connecting that home, the domestic church, with the parish and the greater community. So let's first start, though, with those in-person gatherings. Kind of broke this up into 4 different ways that people use it or get started. Those easy on-ramps. I mean, these can be reimagined kickoff meetings or any of the sacramental preparation sessions, whether it's for baptism, first communion, first reconciliation, or confirmation. Those are easy places to start. When we have parents who are already invested in a certain time in a child's life, or in a certain event beginning or a program beginning, we know that we can have their attention. So if you don't do any kind of parent gathering yet, that's a great place to start. Those reimagined kickoff meetings. I always say when my children were young, you always had those school meetings at the beginning of the year or coaches meetings at the beginning of the year. And often, not that anybody does this, but often you have a handbook and the leader is going through a handbook and telling you the expectations, dress codes, things that are expected this year. And if you have multiple children, those can be difficult meetings because you've heard it before and you can read a handbook. So if you completely reimagine that meeting, when I was in parish ministry and we first started our move from drop-off faith formation to a family approach, we made a lot of mistakes. And one of them was having parents come in and just talking at them. So as we began to learn and have listening sessions and talk to parents about what they liked, what they didn't like, we learned a lot. And one of them, just in listening to them talk to each other, was how much they were learning in those conversations, in those small groups, those round tables, as we gathered them. So those parent kickoff meetings became something entirely different, where we focused on their children. Tell us something about your child. What has surprised you about parenting? What has surprised you about becoming a parent? And they would share amazing stories, from the funny things of how little sleep they could go on, how quickly kids learn how to push your buttons, how different every child is, to wondering if that's how God must love us, that there's this unconditional love you have for a child, and that your love doesn't divide as you have children, but your heart just expands. And then having them talk about what are the things that they do that speak of God. Where are they finding God in their family as they're learning from their children about faith, life, prayer, love, that our children can often be our greatest spiritual directors. And when you shift parents from the listening posture to talking about their children, the energy in the room goes up exponentially. So there was something special that happens when you do that. If you have not started gathering parents, I always say start there. Like, just affirm parents and what they're doing, because often they are resistant to a shift towards a family-centered approach, because there's fear, because there's I've done this, but I don't remember everything. I don't know what I know. I don't want to be thought of as the person that doesn't have the answers. Maybe I don't practice the way that I think you think I should, or the way even I think I should. So there's a lot of fear and resistance. But when you get them talking about their children, that shifts tremendously. Then you have the curriculum-focused approach. So that every month you're going to gather, and you can do this with children and with parents together. I've seen many parishes do that. Or again, you can have the children go off with a catechist, the parents stay together in those small groups if you have the space to have kind of round table discussions. And it starts with some big group conversation, and then going to the small groups and back out again as the facilitator just kind of leads that conversation. This is, as I said, the mistake we made in the beginning of talking at the parents. Instead of giving them an opportunity, we shifted and kind of let the content breathe a little bit. Instead of trying to pack 60 minutes of content in, we kind of gave some nuggets and then let them chew on it, let them talk about it, have them share with each other's ideas how they might practice this at home. We gave them conversations they were going to get in their parent packet going home, conversations they would have with children, having them pick a couple at each table to discuss, how would your child answer this? What's a story you would tell your child about this? Because once they practiced and heard other parents having those conversations, they're much more likely to actually have that conversation at home. So, and again, affirming parents in what they're already doing. Too often we bring parents in and tell them what they should be doing. And there's a lot of shame and blame in that actually keep parents further disconnected. If we can affirm them, if we can remember that they're being countercultural, just showing up to bring their kids for sacraments, even if that's all they do, because their friends, their peers are very disconnected to church and are probably pressuring them more. Why would you stay? Why are you still there? Instead, they're being countercultural. So if we can affirm them, empower them, help them have conversations about their children, remember that their children are the reasons that they're there, give them time to make connections with other parents. Because often we as leaders can complain about, the parent who's ready to take the kid out for sports and they'll sit on the soccer field all day, but they don't want to come to an hour meeting, or they'll go to that dance recital all day Saturday, or that volleyball, whatever it is. And yet the reality is they've made connections there. They have a social community there. They've built friendships that have that liked experience of wanting the best for their children. They can struggle with some of the issues that their child is having with those other parents. Where have we created that space for those parents to make those connections and have their conversations in our own campuses, in our own churches? So that's a really great place to work with parents as well, to give them opportunities to build relationships with each other. You can also have a seasonally focus. So you're not switching everything all at once and bringing families in every single month or every other week, as some places do, but you're approaching it so that you have this intergenerational or a family or parent approach on those specific seasons. You might start with 2, you might start with 4, but focus on what's the event that's happening and give them faith conversations and faith practices around that season. So for Advent, for example, have a gathering. I know some churches that would do a family Advent wreath making experience. So families would come in and make their wreath, and then they'd be given prayers and blessings to say at home throughout the season. Lent, and we'll get into some of this also in the parents making their own plans or families making their own plans for faith formation. But Lent is a really unique time that we have this period of weeks where we can help prepare families to have those faith conversations and those faith practices and have a little formation around it about why we do some things. Because quite often it's been something that we've done always, but parents may or may not have. We have millennials who are parents now, and their practice might have been a little bit different growing up. So helping them have some of those traditions that they can pass on. Again, also at Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, feasts that are celebrating Mary, your own parish feasts. They're really unique times to kind of bring the whole family or the whole church, the whole parish together. And then theme focus. There was a lot of this, and not just gathered, but a lot of this throughout COVID that we'll talk a little bit more about parishes who are entirely focused on Sabbath, entirely focused on prayer for that year. So you can build up some of those practices and some of those conversations, just being focused on a theme. And that can be every month, that could be 4 times a year. The unique thing right now is that people have started to experiment, so parents are ready for that. They may need some consistency after all the change we've been through, but we can ease in. We can look at our 3-year plan, our 5-year plan, and kind of begin to figure out where we're going to start. Which of these would be a good place to gather parents? Then we have people who continue to do online parent gatherings because parents found them so flexible, so easy to participate in because they didn't have to have babysitters for the young ones. They didn't have to get out of the house. So coaching parents, you can do it kind of focused on the lessons that the children are doing, but preparing them to teach at home the rest of the month, or giving them ideas on how to have faith conversations or faith practices around that curriculum that that child is using. Many of the publishers now offer curriculums that are focused, kind of spiral-like, but focused on the entire family. So some of them, it's the theme that every age is learning. And like Flom with the Gospel Weeklies, every family member is looking at that upcoming Sunday gospel. So there's ways to have faith conversations and faith practices around what the children are doing, and while you're coaching parents to have those things at home. You can also do online with family pods. Some places have continued this, and they have some gathered family pods and some online family pods for those who have not come back yet. It's a wonderful opportunity to kind of create groups of families that can learn virtually together, but they could be by age group, they could be by school or neighborhood. You can decide what kind of category you're going to use to place families together, or they can opt in groups as well. Then there are the parent small groups, parent only, so that you can be focused on lessons for adult faith formation, maybe Bible study, asking parents what they want to learn, or parent support group style. So this could be for parents of children who are preparing for sacraments. And it's not all support, but to kind of support each other through some important times or through difficult times. So that preparation, or for children who have special needs, for parents with children who are struggling with depression, all kinds of topics. And that's a good place to start, to let parents know that you really care about where they're at right now. Then there's a hybrid approach, and I see a lot of parishes doing this right now, doing kind of the both and. So it could be both and for everybody. There's some gathered, there's some online, or it's both and because you have some people who are in person and some people who are not. Hybrid models offer both and approach. And I learned these values from John Roberto as we were doing training and listening to parishes from around the country, that it recognizes the importance of in-person relationships and faith-forming experiences, while also recognizing the importance of being responsive to the complexity of people's lives and their religious spiritual needs. So it kind of looks at people's schedules. Some of it can be asynchronous, some of it's synchronous. It looks at the ages of the children, that some people are doing that sandwich thing, caring for children and caring for their parents, and getting away can be difficult. Hybrid models expand faith formation opportunities, allowing leaders to become much more strategic. We can decide right now what we need to focus on because of what's happening in the community, what's happening in children's lives, what kind of feedback parents have given us. I always suggest that even as you begin or before you begin, having those listening tours, going and seeing parents or having listening sessions where you bring parents in to talk about some vision, some ideas that you have about what you want long-term, and that you know it's important for the parents. You know, faith is important for the parents, for their children, because they're here. You know they're being countercultural. And if you share some of that research with parents, they too see the need to become partners. They're not doing this so that their child can be done after first communion or first confirmation, although sometimes that's the message that we hear. I think that's often because of the methods that we're using or the way that we've done it, and they're having a hard time getting a child to participate into their teens. So I think if we have those listening sessions and we share the research, we share our visions, we can get much more buy-in, and we can hear what parents really need and then accompany them in new and exciting ways. So one parish described their hybrid approach this way: we're excited to offer a faith formation model that is home-based, family-focused, and offers both an on-campus and a digital option to better meet our families' needs. We're inspired by a home study model and the blended and digital models we used during the pandemic. The parish is offering a model that is more comprehensive and beneficial for all involved. Another parish described it this way. It's a combination of in-person formation at church and at-home formation. First and third Tuesdays, kids meet in person, time, whatever the time is, at the parish. So they're still having some time with catechists. They're still having some time learning what that curriculum is. Second Tuesday, the parents are teaching. And we know, I'll say one of my strongest resistance when we first started doing family faith formation was from catechists, because they were so worried, number one, about the time that they would have with a child. Like, if we're only meeting once a month, I'm not going to be able to build that relationship. That also helped us build in a life of the parish model where the catechist could be with that child in other ways. And we'll get to that in another section. But here they were resistant also because they thought, well, the parents don't know the faith. How are they going to teach it? And if you started out as a catechist, you learned a lot more when you started teaching. Teaching often is our greatest. That's that hierarchy of learning. If you're just hearing it, if you're just reading it, if you're watching it, if you're teaching it, you learn a lot more. And we cannot be the only people in a child's life who shares faith with them. Because if that's the case, the likelihood of that faith transmission into adulthood is very tiny. But if we can empower an entire community around them, their parents, the parents of their friends, that changes everything. So they would have first and third Tuesday with the kids, second Tuesday at home, and then the fourth Tuesday, parents and catechist formation night. Now, you could do this in person, you could do this online, you could offer both, but that was so that the parents and the catechists were learning together and being trained on how to teach that next month. And then we have this parent or family-led faith formation plans. There were a lot of parishes that offered this during COVID, just trying to have some variety for families that they didn't know what their situations were and what they could do or not. So it can be offered as just a component of a multi-component program, or it can be a supplement to what you're doing. This gives parents ownership over the family's faith formation plans. It allows families to choose lessons according to their own spirituality, the spirituality of their children, their multiple children, the family schedules, the ages of the children, and so much more. It can be seasonal, it can be thematic, it could be a life of the parish focus. And let's talk about each of those. So the seasonal, one parish that I talked to the leader during our coming back from COVID, it was when they were meeting, but people were still tentative about meeting. They had people in a multi-purpose space gathered far apart and with masks, and they taught them a little bit about Lenten practices and gave them resources, but then had the families on their own making their Lenten plan together, so that those plans looked very different according to which practices, which conversations each of those parents and families were taking on, according to the ages of their children, according to their schedules, but everyone made their own plan for Lent. So it was something that was very personal. And the leader had an opportunity to talk to families and help them personalize it. For example, he said there was a mom and daughter who talked about they were already vegetarian. It didn't feel like much for them to give up meat on Friday, because they always gave up meat. So he talked with them about what their sacrifice might be and how they could plan for that. Another family had very young ones. What would that look like for them to be practicing the Lenten practices, almsgiving, et cetera, with little ones? And so it allows for some great opportunities too, but the families feel like they're creating this. It becomes part of what they do. You can do this thematically too. We had a church that had Sabbath for the whole year, and they kind of turned the concept upside down. It wasn't just about how do you practice Sabbath, going to Mass, but Sabbath was created for us. It's created so that we take that rest. We look at the rhythm of our day, of our month, of our year, of the seasons, of our lives, that we're taking time to delight in creation. We're taking time to delight in the gifts that God has given. And it was during COVID, but they spent an entire year on that. And that was such a great opportunity, exploring Sabbaths, that the people began to look at that delight, the gratitude that, oh yeah, Mass is about giving thanks, coming together, Eucharist, giving thanks. So there were many lessons they learned in that. Life of the parish. This is something we started at the parish where I was working at as a parish leader many years ago. And they continue this through the ages, even through the junior high program and confirmation program. The families have an opportunity to explore four. It's the four pillars of the Catholic faith. And they choose from the many things already happening in the parish. And this is such an easy one to implement because there are already things happening in your church. If you just kind of take a survey of what are the prayer opportunities, what are the learning opportunities, devotions, services, social, we said everything counts. Now they couldn't do 4 social events a year, but they could do 1. And they didn't have to hit each pillar in 1 year because they're going to hit it over the years that their child is in formation. So what are the things that could count? And what we did was gather all the ministry leaders and say, what are the things that you have that you're focusing on this year that you would love parishioners, including families, to participate in? How can we help advertise for those? How can we help people know? How can we form people in the practices that they'll be doing? And then they asked, how can they have welcome families? What are the things that they might do? So for example, we had a pro-life group that did Rosary for Life on Wednesday night and Saturday morning. Well, we said families might come if their catechist says, hey, I'm going Wednesday night, love all of your families to come, but they might not have rosaries and they might not know the prayers. So the ministry got a basket of the prayers and a basket of the rosaries, and that empowered the families to participate, even if they had never participated before. So you're creating a network of opportunities. You know, Our Hearts Were Burning Within Us says that the parish is the curriculum. This helps the entire parish take on that responsibility for forming their community, including the families in your program. It's also easy to implement because you don't have to be at everything. What we did was offer families this online reflection form or in person. They could pick it up at the church and fill it out and turn it in, or they could fill it out online. And instead of just checking off as people participate in something, those reflections gave us an opportunity to share their stories again, to share them from the pulpit, to share them in bulletins, newsletters, panel discussions, as we had once or twice a year with those family programs. So that again, you're making the parishioners the evangelizers of the community. We had a mom who in the beginning, as we made the shift, was somewhat resistant. She's like, I've been through CCD. But she took her, as part of this component of the multi-component program, she took her children to Stations of the Cross during Lent. And she had 3 boys that were about 5, 7, 8, or 6, 8, 9, or somewhere in there. And as they got there, she said she chose Stations of the Cross because she knew she wouldn't have to answer any questions. She knew what to do. All they would have to do is follow along with others. She could be in and out in 30 minutes or less. She was very upfront. I figured it'd be an easy something to do. And then as they started with the stations and kneeling and saying the prayers, she said it was like Catholic muscle memory. She remembered doing this as a child with her aunt, who had since passed away, an aunt that she was very close to, every Lent. And as she was thinking about it, her boys are like, what's wrong with you? And she just started crying because she said she realized in that moment, I keep saying I want my kids to have what I had, just go to class and learn it all. And I realized they don't. They don't have the entire family around them supporting this practice. They're not going to the Stations of the Cross and the May crowning and all the things I did growing up. And she became one of our greatest advocates simply from experiencing a faith practice, a faith experience in the life of the community. This can be a very powerful component in your faith formation practice. And then there's integrated faith formation. It is putting all those components together. So one parish offers this, and this was the parish I was at, but after I left, you have the gathered once a month, parents at round tables, children with their catechists, home lessons, digital resources online so the parents can be teaching, a life of the parish component. So they're looking, and some people do that Explore 4, but some do head, heart, hand. So there's 3 activities a family can use during a year. Some do a parish and a missionary or service type event. So that Life of the Parish elective can look a number of ways. And then they did Families Living the Gospel Challenge, which one year they would focus on corporal works of mercy, one year spiritual works of mercy, and one year Catholic social teaching. And they would teach about a specific one each month in the parent session, that gathered once a month parent session. And then they would give them ideas on how to live that out, or how they're already doing those things in their family now. They would give them children's books that were related to the theme, family movies, teens books, all kinds of conversations they could be having around this practice. And then as families did it all throughout the year, they just turned in these reflection forms, and the parish would gather and pull a prize like every quarter, or try 3 times a year, whatever it was. And it would be simple little prizes. It wasn't a big anything. One time they had the little plush Jesus and prayer kid. One time there was a Snickers and something during the holy Halloween party kind of thing. So it's a way to help families see they're already doing this, but to give them the language and the intention around it. And when you have an integrated approach, you're putting all of those pieces together. Now that may seem overwhelming, but it's not something you want to start next year. So when we started, we had just started by gathering families together 4 times a year. And then eventually that shifted to every single month. And eventually that shifted to adding that Life of the Parish component. And then again, something was added. That was over the course of 5 to 7 plus years at least. So you want to look at that long-term approach. What is your vision for 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 7 years from now? And what's going to be your quick win? Where could you start? What could you do now that would give you a quick win in September? And then what's your long-term vision to really kind of shift that trend in disaffiliation in your community by integrating families into the parish, into the community, supporting each other, walking with each other? The possibilities are endless. We just have to dream, and dream big. I think sometimes we're dreaming too small. We want to look at how we can change our program. This is about changing the world. This is about really bringing people back into community, believing in Jesus, seeking their purpose, following his mission. And I thank you. And Heidi, I think we have some time for questions and answers.
Well, thank you so much, Denise. That was fantastic.
Thank
We
you.
have had many positive comments in both the chat and the question and answer area saying that parishes are utilizing family faith formation, and it's really re-enlivened their parish formation programs, et cetera, et cetera. We do have some really good questions. So thanks to everybody, the chat function was disabled at first, so it's enabled if you want to get in there. Otherwise, in the Q&A function there, you can ask a question too. So I have a couple of questions that are kind of related, Denise, so I thought I would kind of ask these together. A participant asked about, sometimes they said the biggest pushback they get, and you mentioned this in your talk, is from catechists, saying that kind of that idea that there's just this feeling that if formation is done by the parents in the home, it won't get done. Or, you know what I'm saying? There's just this feeling. So kind of like, how do you change the hearts and minds? And then another question similarly is sometimes there's pushback from Catholic schools and the school. And how do you deal with that kind of pushback when people sort of don't believe this is gonna happen?
Yeah, so let me start with the first one. Like I said, it's often that you're getting pushback from catechists. And part of that is they don't think parents will do it. If they don't think parents will do it, doing what we're continuing to do isn't going to change anything, because we know that parents are already disaffiliating. So we can continue doing what we're doing, but that means the homework's probably not getting done at home. There's no faith conversations at home. There's few, if any, faith practices at home. If we can begin to engage the parents, those parents are going to learn and do. As you begin this, there's kind of a peer pressure, a positive peer pressure that starts. It's like what I saw with families when we began that Life of the Parish component is as it began to build and the energy kind of builds as people hear their own stories, hear the story of somebody that they're friends with, it begins, okay, who's going to the parish picnic? Or what are you guys doing this year? Are you choosing the parish mission, the Lenten talk? What are you guys doing? And they begin going together. So parents find support in other parents. I think if we continue to lay it on parents, well, they're not going to do it, they're not. But if we begin to hold that expectation higher, and I say we have to stop doing okay, well, there's one mandatory meeting in the beginning of the year and one mandatory mass and et cetera. I always said when they were asking what's mandatory, it's not a state mandated program. You're here because you want your child to have faith. So let's look at what that banquet is that we're offering and hope and expect that you participate in every single thing, because that will give your child the greatest chance of growing in faith. We understand that there's going to be schedules. So it's that hope and expect language that I think helps build. And the more you can get parents who are participating, the more those parents who weren't probably will. That's the only way we're going to get them. If we don't have them now, continuing to let them not participate is on us.
Yeah.
That disaffiliation then is on us. And then going to the schools, often schools, the relationship I've seen in many places, the relationship between school and faith formation can have some conflict. And I've seen that in diocesan offices too. So it's not just in the parish, you're not alone in that, because there can be that, well, we do this every day kind of thing. And parents of the school children can have this, well, I pay for my children to learn faith. But I think it starts, and I say this with everyone who's going to do any kind of faith formation, it starts at that parish leader and pastor. And if your pastor doesn't see this vision, then you need to have that advocating with that pastor before you go any other layers. So it's that you're forming your team, you're forming your staff, you're forming your volunteers before you go to the next layer. And if you're in a community that has a school teacher, then I think that's in our school, so there's teachers and principals, then you need to include that principal and maybe do some formation with those teachers around the research we've been talking about. Just because a child is in a Catholic school doesn't mean their family is practicing. Just because the child is coming doesn't mean that you don't need to have some engagement with those parents. So if we can do that model of formation together in doing that dreaming, and then share that research and why it is we need to engage parents, that school principal will also be much more likely to participate. It may not be in the same, but you could help form some ideas so that they could also do that kind of engagement, even if it's within that community. Baby steps, as I say, there's nothing that you want to do and change overnight, but baby steps in that right direction.
Thank you. Here's another great question. Do you recommend keeping the family large group gathering throughout the summer months? How do we handle summer in parish life? Because
it happens different everywhere. And I'll say that because some switch to they do all summer, but switch to an outside summer thing. So they might have a s'mores for, a cookout thing for the families. It might be more social, but again, even that is impactful for our programs because you're building those relationships. So it could be very much like VBS type activity, or your VBS also includes family. So there are some places that are still kind of no programming for families in summer, but then they still have the newsletters with faith questions, activities. Parents, go for a prayer walk with your children. Show us the pictures you take. Here are the stories that, the conversations you're having. So there's some kind of contact throughout the summer, even if it's not programming.
Yeah, and acknowledging that it's summertime and we get it.
Exactly, we get it.
We get it. So another question came in earlier that I captured. Any suggestions for capturing non-English speaking parents?
Yeah, and again, this also depends on the parish. And this is why I love, when we started, there were very few places doing family faith formation. So resources were few, but a lot of curriculum providers are also providing it in Spanish. Sometimes the community is such that you have two different communities. you have a Spanish-speaking community and an English-speaking community all in the same parish. There are many places that are doing parent gatherings separate. I think it depends on what's best for your community. Obvious integration is always the goal, but sometimes that has to start slow. There are other places that their communities are already so bilingual that they may have translator ear providers, and you can get grants for that sometimes, so that translation is happening. You have a speaker or a language provider. People are choosing their tables in large group according to what language is being spoken, so that it can be a bilingual gathering in many places. But I've seen a lot of places doing both. Again, you have to do what works best for you, but inclusion so that everybody has the same opportunities is the goal.
So we have some questions here. Someone asked earlier about pods. What do you mean when you say, like, where do the pod meetings take place? So that's one. And then another question just came in. What means or sites are best for families to share their conversations, reflections, and images? And I think what they're talking about here is, like, what's a safe online tool? You know what I'm saying?
Right. So let me do both of those. First, pods. One of my mentors early on in this was Dr. Kathy Amadei, and she is still at a parish doing family faith formation over 25 years after she started. And she's just phenomenal in this. During COVID, they had a brief time where they weren't meeting in person, but they had been focused for so long on building community that even their community, those families were like, can we meet safely? Can we do something? So they started gathering in pods, like groups of 2 or 3 families, depending on how big the families were, in every space they had on campus, but 2 or 3 pods and all masked, 2 or 3 pods over here throughout. There were other places that loved that idea, but would never meet in person, smaller spaces, not enough spaces on campus. So they did that digitally. They gathered everybody, spoke, and then put them into breakout rooms that they had arranged ahead of time according to those ages. So when I say pods, I mean it's almost like a small Christian community, but it's of 2 or 3 families. So yeah, and then the other one was on the sites. So a lot of times, most of the parishes that I've worked with have those reflection forms just in a Google form, so that then they get that information off the Google form in an Excel spreadsheet, and they can share that just by pulling. And unless they have permission from a family to use their name, they would just say, mom of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old shared that, So gathering that information. Then there were other providers that allowed you to share video just to the leader. And then the leader could capture those with permission, but otherwise they just had the answers and the responses. So yeah.
So there's ways to do it safely.
Yeah, ways to do it safely.
So some questions are coming in, and I just want to put these kind of all together, because at the core of a lot of these comments and questions that everybody's having here from all of our wonderful participants is, it doesn't seem like, and we know this, anyone who works in parish or has worked in parish, it doesn't seem like families are going to mass. And so we can have these marvelous formation programs, whether it's, catechist led or family formation, et cetera, et cetera. But if there's not the liturgy, or there's not that weekly mass attendance, or even monthly, how do you have any, and I know this is the challenge of our time, right? But so not, Denise solved this for us, but but it's a good question. It's a really essential one, because how do we prepare for the sacraments, and if there's not that liturgical connection? So do you have any ideas on how to encourage mass attendance?
So I have a few. I want to go back to the last one first also and say, a lot of places are also doing private Facebook groups so that they can have that conversation online with families safely. I forgot that one. And that's important, because those can be private groups just for those families.
Yeah.
The increasing mass attendance, I think it's going to be, I'll say threefold, but at least threefold. Part of it is that engagement of community. When somebody feels like they don't belong to a community, when they don't have friends, they haven't created relationships in that community, they're connected to the parish because they want their children to have sacraments, or they want to have the mass when they're going to go at Christmas and Easter, whatever it is. they have it. But without those relationships, there's less pressure to feel a part of the regular activity. There's also many of us, and I'm on the tail end of the boomer here, so the boomer age, where faith was something that was private, and it can be very personal, but it was never meant to be private. So kind of reforming people in those small groups helps us to have conversations with them about, this is why our faith is communal. This is why we're called to come together, so that when we need faith, we can see the faith of someone else in the parish. When we need support, when somebody else needs support, they can see our faith. And I think as we help people grow in their faith and grow in the ways they're practicing at home with their children, that helps make the connection back to liturgy. We have to help make that connection. But I think, just like I said, we have to advocate with the pastor for why we need this. We also have to advocate with the entire liturgical committee that we're including families with children of all ages, that we are attending to it being an engaging and enlivening celebration of our faith, of the altar, of the table that we're going to gather at. And do some formation around that. Why do we do that? So again, I think it's creating relationships and feeling of connection and belonging. That means a lot of hospitality, a lot of welcoming, a lot of invitation, again and again, without blame and shame. Too often people are also resistant because of that blame and shame. So I always tell parishes to start with prayer and formation with your team and build from there. And this is not different, to begin to pray for, with love, the people who are not connected to Mass. And make sure we're providing great celebratory liturgy for them to attend, because if we're inviting them to something that we ourselves are like, that was okay, then maybe there's a reason they don't want to. It has to be a full community celebration.
I think that's a whole other webinar we could do, right?
That's a whole other webinar. And again, speaking with love to our pastors that we want to help, because I mean, I've met pastors who have given their life to this completely, but it's really hard to be excited and sharing their love for this faith in those homilies when the people, you've got 10 people out there when you used to have 100 and they're looking at watches. So we got to support each other. Yeah.
Well, and acknowledge what we've all come through here in these last several years too.
Exactly. There's a lot of healing to be done.
Thank you so much. I'm just mindful of the time. Denise put her information in the chat, so if there's more questions, you can reach out to her directly. I think there's maybe one more slide here.
Let me try and get to it. There we go.
Yes. So anyway, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. If you are interested, and I hope you are, in purchasing copies of Denise's book, there's a promo code related to this webinar there, Friday Faith 2. Friday Faith 2. And I just want to thank everyone again for attending. This was just phenomenal. And I believe that we will be sending out the recording to all attendees of the webinar. So you have that and you can share with people who maybe couldn't attend and want to watch the recording and glean from Denise's wonderful wisdom here. So thanks again to everyone. Thank you very, very much. And hopefully we can do this again in the future.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.